Right now, while the world debates trade wars and military tensions, China is executing a strategy that most Western analysts completely misunderstand. They see Belt and Road infrastructure projects and think it's about economic development. They see digital currency initiatives and think it's about financial innovation. They see military base construction and think it's about regional power projection. But if you study what America did in 1944, not just the military campaigns, but the economic and monetary architecture built during World War II, you discover something chilling. China isn't just challenging American hegemony. China is copying the exact playbook America used to replace Britain as the dominant global power 80 years ago. In July 1944, 730 delegates from 44 countries gathered in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, for a conference that would reshape the global financial system. The official purpose was creating stable exchange rates and promoting international trade. The real purpose was establishing the dollar as the world's reserve currency and making America the center of global finance. Today, China is building the same infrastructure: digital currency systems, international payment networks, commodity trading platforms, and financial institutions that will allow them to replace the dollar the same way America replaced sterling. The pattern is identical, the timeline is accelerating, and most Western policymakers have no idea what's actually happening. This is the economic undercurrent, where we follow the money trails that shape your world. And nothing is ever as simple as it looks. Global economic dominance isn't achieved through military conquest or technological superiority alone. It's built through financial architecture that makes your currency indispensable to international commerce. When other countries must use your currency to buy essential commodities, when global trade settlements flow through your banking system, when international reserves are held in your government bonds, you control the world economy regardless of your military strength. If you trace how America achieved this dominance after 1944 and compare it to what China is building today, you discover an uncomfortable truth. China isn't trying to beat America at America's game. China is playing America's game from 1944, while America is playing the game that Britain played in 1944, defending an existing system that's becoming obsolete. To understand how this transition works and why it's probably unstoppable at this point, we need to go back to the moment when America executed the greatest geopolitical strategy in modern history. Not D-Day or the atomic bomb, but the financial architecture that would control global commerce for the next 80 years. July 1944. While American soldiers fought their way across Normandy, a different kind of battle was being waged in the mountains of New Hampshire. The Bretton Woods Conference brought together representatives from every allied nation to design the post-war financial system. Britain arrived expecting to maintain the pound sterling's role as the primary international currency. America had different plans. The British delegation, led by economist John Maynard Keynes, proposed an elegant solution: create an international currency called banco that would be used for trade between nations. No single country would dominate global finance. International trade would operate through a neutral clearing system managed by a new international institution. It was a brilliant proposal that would have created a truly multipolar financial system. It was also completely ignored. The American delegation, led by Harry Dexter White, had a simpler proposal: make the dollar convertible to gold at a fixed rate, require all other currencies to fix their exchange rates relative to the dollar, and establish the dollar as the primary international reserve currency. In exchange, America would provide the capital to rebuild Europe and Asia through institutions like the World Bank and International Monetary Fund. This wasn't just monetary policy. It was the most sophisticated economic colonization strategy ever devised. By making the dollar indispensable to international commerce, America would control global trade flows without occupying foreign territory or maintaining expensive imperial administrations. The British had no choice but to accept. Their economy was devastated by 6 years of war. Their gold reserves were exhausted. Their industrial capacity had been converted entirely to military production. Without American financial support, Britain faced economic collapse, regardless of military victory. But the real genius of the American strategy wasn't visible at Bretton Woods. It was happening simultaneously in oil fields across the Middle East, where American companies were securing exclusive drilling rights that would reshape global energy markets for decades. Standard Oil, Texaco, Mobil, and Gulf Oil didn't just want to extract Middle Eastern petroleum. They wanted to control how that petroleum was sold internationally. Working closely with the US State Department, these companies negotiated agreements that required oil purchases to be denominated in dollars, regardless of the buyer's or seller's domestic currency. This created the foundation for what would become known as the petrodollar system, the arrangement that makes dollars indispensable to global energy markets. Every country that wanted to import oil had to acquire dollars first. Every oil exporting country received dollars that needed to be invested somewhere. The natural destination for those dollars was US Treasury bonds and American financial markets. By 1950, this system was generating massive capital flows into the United States. Countries around the world were accumulating dollar reserves to facilitate international trade. American banks were financing global commerce through dollar-denominated loans. The Federal Reserve had become, in effect, the central bank for the entire world economy. The strategic brilliance was mathematical. Every dollar that foreigners held in reserve was essentially a loan to the United States at below-market interest rates. Every transaction conducted in dollars generated fees for American financial institutions. Every fluctuation in dollar exchange rates could be managed through Federal Reserve policy to benefit American economic interests. Britain had achieved similar dominance during the 19th century through the gold standard and sterling-based trade finance, but the American system was far more sophisticated. Unlike gold, dollars could be created in unlimited quantities to meet global demand. Unlike sterling, dollars were backed by the world's largest economy and most powerful military. Unlike previous reserve currency systems, the dollar system included automatic recycling mechanisms that channeled foreign savings back into American financial markets. The Korean War provided the first major test of this system. When America needed to finance a massive military buildup in Asia, the Federal Reserve simply created additional dollars to fund defense spending. The inflationary pressure from this money creation was exported to foreign countries holding dollar reserves, while America captured the real resources needed for military production. This exorbitant privilege, France's Charles de Gaulle coined the term, allowed America to finance global military operations, domestic consumption, and industrial investment simultaneously, without the traditional balance of payments constraints that limited other countries' economic policies. By 1960, the dollar system was so entrenched that even countries that opposed American foreign policy had no choice but to participate. The Soviet Union conducted international trade in dollars. China used dollars for foreign exchange reserves. Even declared enemies of the United States were forced to accumulate American currency to participate in global commerce. The system reached its ultimate expression in 1971, when President Nixon ended dollar convertibility to gold. Rather than weakening American financial dominance, this actually strengthened it by removing the last constraint on dollar creation. The Federal Reserve could now provide unlimited dollars to meet global demand without worrying about gold reserve requirements. But the end of gold convertibility also planted the seeds of the system's eventual obsolescence. Without gold backing, the dollar's value depended entirely on confidence in American economic and political stability. As long as America remained the world's dominant economy and most stable political system, this confidence could be maintained indefinitely. The strategic question that Nixon and his advisors didn't fully consider was, what happens when another country becomes large enough and stable enough to offer a credible alternative to the dollar system? By the 1980s, Japan's rapid economic growth raised this possibility. Japanese manufacturers were dominating global markets in automobiles, electronics, and industrial equipment. The yen was becoming increasingly important in Asian trade settlements. Some economists predicted that Tokyo would replace New York as the center of global finance. America's response was swift and decisive. Through a combination of trade negotiations, financial market manipulation, and monetary policy coordination, American officials engineered the Plaza Accord of 1985, which forced massive yen appreciation that devastated Japanese export competitiveness. Japan's economic miracle ended abruptly, and Tokyo never threatened New York's financial dominance. The Japanese challenge failed because it relied on conventional economic competition, making better products, achieving higher productivity, accumulating trade surpluses. But financial dominance isn't achieved through economic performance alone. It requires building alternative infrastructure that can replace existing systems entirely. China learned this lesson carefully. Rather than challenging America through direct economic competition, China is building parallel financial infrastructure that will allow countries to conduct international commerce without using dollars at all. This is exactly what America did to Britain in 1944, but with 21st century technology and 80 years of accumulated strategic wisdom. Fast forward to 2013, and something remarkable happened in a ballroom at the Shangri-La Hotel in Singapore. China's President Xi Jinping announced the Belt and Road Initiative to an audience of business leaders and government officials. Western media described it as an infrastructure development program. Financial analysts focused on the construction contracts and commodity demand. Almost everyone missed the real significance. China was building the physical and digital infrastructure for a post-dollar global economy. The Belt and Road Initiative isn't just about roads, railways, and ports. It's about creating economic dependencies that will make Chinese currency and Chinese financial institutions indispensable to international commerce across Asia, Africa, and Europe. This is precisely what America did with the Marshall Plan and development finance institutions after 1944. But China's version is far more sophisticated because it operates in the digital age with technologies that didn't exist when America built the dollar system. Consider China's digital currency initiative, officially called the Digital Currency Electronic Payment (DCEP) system. Western analysis focuses on domestic surveillance and social control applications, but the real strategic purpose is creating a payment system that can process international transactions without using the SWIFT network that America controls. SWIFT, the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication, is the messaging system that enables international bank transfers. Every cross-border payment that uses traditional banking must pass through SWIFT, which gives American authorities the ability to monitor and block transactions involving any country, company, or individual they choose to target. When America imposes financial sanctions, they work by excluding targets from SWIFT access. Iran, Russia, and Venezuela have all experienced the economic devastation that results from being cut off from the international payment system. China watched these cases carefully and understood that financial independence requires building alternative payment infrastructure. China's DCEP system is designed to provide that alternative. Unlike cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin, DCEP is controlled entirely by the People's Bank of China. Unlike the dollar system, DCEP transactions can be settled directly between Chinese institutions and foreign counterparts without passing through American-controlled networks. The pilot programs reveal the strategic vision. Chinese companies working on Belt and Road projects are increasingly using DCEP for cross-border payments. Chinese tourists traveling abroad can use DCEP for purchases in countries that have adopted the system. Chinese importers and exporters can settle trade transactions in digital yuan without touching the dollar system at all. This creates the same network effects that made the dollar indispensable after 1944. The more countries that adopt DCEP for trade settlements, the more attractive the system becomes for other countries. The more transactions that flow through Chinese payment networks, the more dependent global commerce becomes on Chinese financial infrastructure. But the Digital Currency Initiative is only one component of China's strategy. The much larger component is commodity market restructuring through what economists call yuan internationalization. China is now the world's largest importer of oil, iron ore, copper, soybeans, and most other essential commodities. This import demand gives China enormous leverage over global commodity markets, the same leverage that America used to create the petrodollar system in the 1970s. The Shanghai crude oil futures contract, launched in 2018, allows oil transactions to be settled in yuan instead of dollars for the first time since the 1970s. The contract specifications seem technical, but the strategic implications are revolutionary. Countries that export oil to China can now receive payment in yuan, which they can then use to purchase Chinese-manufactured goods without converting to dollars at any point in the transaction cycle. This yuan-denominated oil trade is expanding rapidly. Russia, Iran, and Venezuela, all targets of US financial sanctions, have strong incentives to avoid dollar-based transactions entirely. Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states are exploring yuan-denominated sales to hedge against potential future sanctions or dollar instability. The mathematical impact is the same as America's petrodollar strategy, but in reverse. Instead of forcing countries to acquire dollars to buy oil, China is allowing countries to acquire yuan to sell oil. Instead of recycling oil revenues into US Treasury bonds, China is channeling oil revenues into Chinese financial markets and Belt and Road infrastructure projects. China's commodity exchanges now offer yuan-denominated futures contracts for iron ore, copper, aluminum, zinc, and agricultural products. Chinese banks provide trade finance for commodity transactions in yuan. Chinese insurance companies offer coverage for yuan-denominated international trade. The entire infrastructure for conducting global commerce in yuan is being assembled piece by piece. The most sophisticated component is China's alternative to the World Bank and International Monetary Fund. The Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, AIIB, and the New Development Bank, NDB, provide development finance for infrastructure projects across Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Unlike World Bank lending that requires policy reforms and imposes American economic models, Chinese development finance focuses purely on infrastructure construction that integrates recipient countries into China's economic orbit. These institutions don't just provide capital, they create economic dependencies that last for decades. Countries that borrow from Chinese development banks to build highways, railways, and ports often discover that the loan terms require using Chinese construction companies, Chinese equipment, and Chinese workers. The debt payments must be made in yuan, creating permanent demand for Chinese currency. When countries can't service their debt payments, China offers debt relief in exchange for strategic asset control. The Hambantota port in Sri Lanka became Chinese-controlled after Sri Lanka couldn't meet loan obligations. Similar arrangements are being negotiated for ports in Pakistan, Myanmar, and East Africa. This isn't predatory lending, it's strategic infrastructure acquisition that mirrors how American companies gained control of global energy resources during the 1940s and 1950s. The difference is that China is operating more systematically and with clearer long-term strategic vision. The technology component amplifies every other element of the strategy. China's dominance in 5G telecommunications, artificial intelligence, and digital payment systems creates additional dependencies that reinforce economic relationships. Countries that adopt Chinese technology standards often find themselves locked into Chinese financial and economic ecosystems for decades. The speed of implementation is breathtaking compared to America's gradual dollar system construction. America needed 30 years to establish global dollar dominance after Bretton Woods. China is building comparable infrastructure in less than 15 years, leveraging digital technology and massive capital deployment that wasn't available to previous challengers. Most importantly, China is building redundant systems that can function independently of American-controlled infrastructure. If China is excluded from SWIFT, transactions can flow through DCEP networks. If Chinese banks are blocked from dollar markets, they can provide trade finance in yuan. If Chinese companies face sanctions, they can operate entirely within yuan-denominated supply chains. This redundancy makes China's challenge to American financial dominance far more robust than previous attempts by Japan or European countries that remain dependent on American financial infrastructure, even while competing with American economic interests. The hidden truth that Washington refuses to acknowledge is brutal. America's response to China's financial challenge is accelerating China's success rather than preventing it. Every sanction imposed, every technology restriction implemented, every financial institution excluded from dollar markets pushes more countries toward the Chinese alternative system. This isn't accidental. It's the inevitable mathematics of imperial overstretch. When a dominant power uses its financial system as a weapon, it forces other countries to build alternative systems for their own protection. The more aggressively America weaponizes the dollar, the faster China's parallel system grows. Consider the progression of American financial warfare since 2010. Sanctions against Iran cut that country off from international banking, forcing Iran to develop barter trade relationships and alternative payment mechanisms with China. Instead of forcing Iranian compliance with American policy, the sanctions created the first major test case for non-dollar international commerce. The results were educational for both China and America's other potential adversaries. Iran survived the sanctions by redirecting oil exports to Asian markets, accepting payment in Chinese yuan, and using that yuan to purchase Chinese-manufactured goods. The Iranian economy suffered, but it didn't collapse, and it emerged more integrated with Chinese supply chains than ever before. Russia learned from Iran's experience. When America imposed financial sanctions after the 2014 Crimea annexation, Russia immediately began building alternative financial infrastructure. Russia's Maya payment card system replaced Visa and MasterCard for domestic transactions. Russian banks developed direct correspondent relationships with Chinese banks to bypass SWIFT for bilateral trade. Russia's central bank began accumulating Chinese yuan as an alternative to dollar reserves. The 2022 escalation of sanctions after Ukraine turned these preparations into operational reality. When Russian banks were excluded from SWIFT, trade with China continued through alternative payment channels. When Russian dollar reserves were frozen, existing yuan reserves provided liquidity for essential imports. When Russian energy exports were restricted from European markets, Chinese demand provided alternative revenue streams. Each sanctions episode teaches the same lesson to countries around the world. Integration with the American financial system creates vulnerability that can be exploited for political purposes. The logical response is to reduce that vulnerability by developing alternative relationships and payment mechanisms. China provides the only credible alternative. European financial institutions remain too integrated with American markets to offer genuine independence from dollar-based sanctions. Japanese financial institutions are too closely aligned with American foreign policy to provide reliable alternatives during diplomatic disputes. Only China has the market size, technological capability, and political motivation to build truly independent financial infrastructure. This creates a strategic paradox that American policymakers seem incapable of understanding. The more America uses financial sanctions to enforce its foreign policy preferences, the more countries have incentive to reduce their dependence on American financial infrastructure. The more countries reduce their dollar dependence, the less effective American sanctions become. The less effective American sanctions become, the more tempted America becomes to escalate financial warfare. Each escalation drives more countries toward Chinese alternatives. The mathematics are relentless. Every country that adopts Chinese payment systems for even a small fraction of their international trade creates network effects that make those systems more attractive to other countries. Every company that learns to operate with yuan-denominated supply chains reduces the global economy's dependence on dollar intermediation. More importantly, every successful demonstration of non-dollar commerce proves that alternatives to American financial hegemony are not just theoretical possibilities, but practical realities. The European response to American sanctions reveals the depth of this problem. Rather than supporting American financial warfare against Russia and China, European countries are developing their own alternative payment systems, Instex for Iran trade, various bilateral agreements for Russian energy payments, and direct integration with Chinese financial institutions for Asian commerce. European leaders understand that American financial dominance is a constraint on European sovereignty, just as much as it's a constraint on Chinese or Russian sovereignty. The ability to exclude European companies from dollar markets frees European assets held in American institutions, and monitor European financial transactions gives America veto power over European foreign policy decisions. The only protection against this American financial control is reduced dependence on dollar-based systems. European institutions are quietly building that reduced dependence by developing alternative relationships with Chinese financial infrastructure. This creates a cascading effect across the global financial system. As European institutions develop non-dollar payment capabilities, they become available to African and Latin American countries that want to reduce their own dollar dependence. As Asian countries integrate with Chinese payment systems, they provide models for other developing countries to follow. The technological dimension makes this trend irreversible in ways that weren't possible during previous challenges to reserve currency systems. Britain's sterling system required physical infrastructure, banks, telegraph networks, shipping routes that took decades to build and could be disrupted through military action. China's digital financial infrastructure can be deployed instantly across global internet networks. A country can begin accepting digital yuan payments immediately without building physical banking infrastructure. Trade relationships can be established digitally without requiring decades of institutional development. The speed advantage is decisive. America built global dollar dominance gradually over 30 years, giving other countries time to adapt to each change. China is offering complete alternatives to dollar dependence that can be implemented within months rather than decades. American financial institutions are beginning to recognize this reality, but their response options are severely constrained by political considerations. American banks would benefit from participating in Chinese financial infrastructure development, but political pressure prevents meaningful cooperation. American technology companies could profit from providing services to Chinese payment systems, but export restrictions limit their participation. This political constraint means that American private sector capabilities can't be deployed to compete with Chinese financial innovation. Instead of leveraging American technological and financial expertise to build better alternatives to Chinese systems, American policy is forcing American companies to withdraw from these markets entirely. The resulting competitive disadvantage is cumulative. Chinese financial institutions gain experience and market share in digital currency systems, cross-border payments, and alternative financial infrastructure, while American institutions are prohibited from competing in these markets. When political restrictions are eventually lifted, American companies will face Chinese competitors with years of operational experience and established market positions. The debt dimension adds another layer of strategic vulnerability. America's federal debt now exceeds $33 trillion and continues growing faster than economic output. Financing this debt depends on foreign demand for U.S. Treasury bonds, particularly from countries that accumulate dollar reserves through international trade. As China provides alternatives to dollar-based trade settlement, foreign countries have less need to hold large dollar reserves. Reduced demand for dollar reserves translates directly into reduced demand for U.S. Treasury bonds. Without foreign financing, America would face dramatic interest rate increases that would make current debt levels unsustainable. China understands this vulnerability and is exploiting it systematically. Every country that adopts yuan-based trade settlement reduces global demand for dollar reserves. Every reduction in dollar reserve demand increases the cost of financing American government debt. Higher American debt costs constrain American fiscal policy options and reduce America's ability to finance global military operations. The hidden truth is that China doesn't need to directly challenge American military power to undermine American global dominance. China just needs to provide attractive alternatives to dollar dependence that reduce foreign demand for American debt. The mathematics of fiscal sustainability will force American retrenchment without any military confrontation. America's strategic responses have proven counterproductive because they're based on the assumption that American financial dominance is a natural result of American economic superiority, rather than a constructed system that requires constant maintenance and adaptation. The more aggressively America defends this system through financial warfare, the more it demonstrates the system's fundamental vulnerability to countries willing to build alternatives. Fast forward to today, and the parallel between China's position in 2025 and America's position in 1944 is so precise, it's almost disturbing. Both countries leveraged global crisis periods to accelerate the construction of alternative financial infrastructure, while existing powers were distracted by immediate security threats. Both countries used their position as essential economic partners to gain acceptance for their preferred monetary arrangements. Both countries built redundant systems that could function independently of existing international institutions. The Ukraine conflict serves the same strategic function for China that World War II served for America. It's forcing rapid changes in global financial architecture, while existing powers are focused on military rather than economic competition. While Europe and America concentrate on sanctions policy and weapons supplies, China is quietly expanding yuan-based trade relationships across Asia, Africa, and Latin America. The numbers tell the story. China's share of global trade has increased from 12% to 18% since 2020, while America's share has remained flat at around 11%. More importantly, an increasing percentage of Chinese trade is being settled in yuan rather than dollars. Yuan settlements now account for over 25% of China's total international trade, compared to less than 15% in 2020. This shift is accelerating as more countries seek alternatives to dollar dependence. Brazil and China now conduct their bilateral trade entirely in yuan and reals, bypassing the dollar system completely. India and Russia are developing rupee-ruble trade mechanisms for energy and defense transactions. Even traditional American allies like Saudi Arabia are exploring yuan-denominated oil sales for transactions with Asian customers. The BRICS expansion announced in 2024 adds massive scale to this trend. The addition of Saudi Arabia, UAE, Iran, Egypt, and Ethiopia brings the BRICS share of global GDP to over 35% and global population to nearly 50%. More importantly, these countries control approximately 60% of global oil production and 40% of global mineral extraction. When this resource base begins conducting internal trade in alternative currencies, the mathematics of dollar demand change fundamentally. Countries that primarily trade with BRICS members have less need for dollar reserves. Reduced dollar reserve demand means reduced demand for US Treasury bonds. Reduced Treasury demand means higher American borrowing costs and constrained fiscal policy options. The technical infrastructure to support this transition is now operational. China's cross-border interbank payment system, CIPS, processes over $50 billion in daily transactions compared to SWIFT's $150 billion. But CIPS is growing at 30% annually while SWIFT growth remains flat. At current growth rates, CIPS will match SWIFT's transaction volume by 2028. China's central bank digital currency pilots now include 26 countries and cover over 200 million potential users. The eCNY wallet application has been downloaded by over 300 million people, making it the world's largest digital currency platform. While Western central banks debate the theoretical implications of digital currencies, China is building operational experience with actual users conducting real transactions. The commercial banking infrastructure shows similar progress. Chinese banks now operate in 60 countries compared to 40 in 2020. The Bank of China, Industrial and Commercial Bank of China, and China Construction Bank have established comprehensive international operations that can provide full banking services in yuan without requiring correspondent relationships with American institutions. This parallel banking system creates the same redundancy that America built during the 1940s and 1950s. When countries can conduct all their international banking through Chinese institutions, they become immune to American financial sanctions. When trade finance is available in yuan from Chinese banks, companies have alternatives to dollar-based financing. When investment capital can be raised in Chinese markets, countries don't need access to American financial markets. The timing considerations mirror 1944 precisely. America built dollar dominance, while Britain was weakened by war and focused on immediate survival rather than long-term strategic planning. China is building yuan alternatives, while America is weakened by fiscal constraints and focused on immediate security threats rather than long-term economic competition. The generational leadership change adds another parallel. The American officials who designed the Bretton Woods system were young technocrats who understood that the post-war world would require completely different financial architecture than the pre-war system. Similarly, Chinese leaders who are implementing yuan internationalization are young technocrats who understand that the digital age requires completely different monetary infrastructure than the analog systems built in the 20th century. Both generational cohorts share the same strategic insight. Existing powers defend obsolete systems, while rising powers build replacement systems. Success comes not from improving existing infrastructure, but from making existing infrastructure irrelevant. The debt crisis timeline provides the final parallel. Britain's financial dominance ended when war debts made sterling convertibility unsustainable, forcing the 1967 devaluation that established dollar supremacy definitively. America's current debt trajectory suggests a similar crisis point approaching within the next decade. U.S. federal debt service now exceeds $1 trillion annually and is projected to reach $1.7 trillion by 2030. At current growth rates, debt service will consume 25% of federal revenues by 2035, making discretionary spending, including defense, increasingly difficult to finance. Without dramatic fiscal adjustment, American debt sustainability will become questionable within this decade. China's debt levels are also elevated, but Chinese debt is primarily domestic and denominated in yuan. China's government can always service yuan-denominated debt by creating additional yuan. America's government cannot create foreign currency to service debt held by foreign creditors if those creditors lose confidence in the dollar system. This creates an asymmetric vulnerability that China can exploit through patient strategic pressure. Every country that reduces its dollar reserves by adopting yuan alternatives decreases foreign demand for U.S. Treasury bonds. Marginal reductions in Treasury demand can trigger significant increases in American borrowing costs, accelerating the debt sustainability timeline. The artificial intelligence revolution adds a technological dimension that wasn't available in 1944, but strongly favors China's strategic position. China's dominance in AI infrastructure, semiconductors, data centers, algorithm development, creates additional dependencies that reinforce financial relationships. Countries that adopt Chinese AI systems for industrial automation, urban management, or financial services often find themselves locked into Chinese technology ecosystems that integrate naturally with Chinese financial infrastructure. The technical barriers to switching between different AI platforms create switching costs that make Chinese financial alternatives increasingly attractive over time. Meanwhile, American attempts to restrict Chinese access to advanced semiconductors and AI technology are accelerating Chinese domestic innovation rather than preventing it. Chinese companies are developing indigenous capabilities that reduce their dependence on American technology, while maintaining their competitive advantages in system integration and cost-effectiveness. The geopolitical calendar favors China's timeline. American presidential elections create policy discontinuity every 4 years, preventing sustained long-term strategic planning. Chinese leadership continuity allows multi-decade strategic implementation that can survive short-term political changes and economic disruptions. By 2030, China's alternative financial infrastructure will be comprehensive enough to support international commerce independently of American systems. By 2035, countries will face a genuine choice between dollar-based and yuan-based international economic relationships. By 2040, the yuan may be the preferred currency for trade settlement across Asia, Africa, and Latin America. The pattern is clear, and the timeline is accelerating. China is building the same type of alternative financial architecture that America built to replace British dominance, but with better technology, clearer strategic vision, and mathematical precision that makes the outcome increasingly inevitable. So how do you position yourself when the world's reserve currency changes? In every major transition between global monetary systems, certain types of investors not only survived, but emerged dramatically wealthier. The survivors understood that currency transitions create massive wealth transfer opportunities for those positioned correctly, while devastating those caught on the wrong side of the change. During Britain's transition from gold standard to sterling dominance in the 1870s, survivors positioned in British financial institutions, shipping companies, and colonial resource extraction. When America replaced Britain after 1944, survivors held dollars, American industrial stocks and oil infrastructure, before the transition became obvious to conventional investors. Today's transition from dollar to yuan dominance will create similar opportunities, but the geographic and sectoral focus will be completely different from previous transitions. The survivors will establish meaningful exposure to Asian financial markets before yuan internationalization reaches critical mass. This doesn't mean buying Chinese stocks through American financial institutions. Those positions remain vulnerable to political interference and regulatory restrictions. Real positioning requires direct access to Hong Kong, Singapore, and Shanghai financial markets through local institutions that can operate independently of American financial infrastructure. Bank accounts denominated in yuan, Hong Kong dollars, and Singapore dollars provide currency diversification that will appreciate as Asian economies become less dependent on dollar intermediaries.